In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is
My perfect sister accused me of selling drugs and my parents threw me out. 6 years later, my mother is dying. In my family, appearances and achievements were always the most important thing. My father Benjamin, who is 57, occupies a respected position in an insurance company where everyone admires him for his work. My mother Olivia, 56, as well as being a biology teacher, was always the kind of attentive and affectionate mother who is there for her children. However, everything at home came with conditions. We had to look and behave impeccably, following to the letter what they expected of us. My sister Bella, who is now 30 and an engineer, represented everything my parents dreamed of in a daughter. Being 4 years older than me, it seemed that everything came naturally to her. She won prizes, received constant praise, and my parents looked at her with pride. I, on the other hand, was quieter and more reserved, with a touch of rebelliousness. I wasn't lacking in intelligence, but I preferred to do things my own way. My interests didn't always coincide with what my parents considered to be successful. For example, I decided to study English literature, something they weren't particularly enthusiastic about. Even so, they accepted our differences as long as I stayed within certain limits, and I tried not to cross those lines. Despite being so different, I admired Bella very much. She embodied everything our parents wanted, and I saw her as someone I could trust and learn from. I never imagined she would do something so terrible to me. Everything changed 6 years ago when Bella told a lie that destroyed my life. I was 20 years old and at university, trying to build my future. Bella was still the favorite, the perfect daughter who did everything right and never disappointed our parents. I felt like I lived under her shadow, unable to reach her standards. A few months before the big lie, I noticed worrying changes in Bella. She asked me to help her cover up some risky activities she had been involved in. She was mixing with problematic people and getting into situations that seemed wrong to me. She wanted me to lie to our parents and provide her with an alibi, arguing that it was my duty as her sister as she had always supported me. But something didn't add up to me, and I didn't want to get involved in her affairs. I was focused on keeping my life in order, and lying for her seemed like a bad idea that would only bring problems. When I told her I wouldn't do it, that I didn't want to risk it, she became enraged as if I had terribly betrayed her. Her reaction was so intense that it scared me. She warned me that I would regret having upset her, that she would find a way to make me pay. At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic and that eventually she would get over it. Looking back, that was the moment that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, Bella began to subtly undermine my image. Then she told a devastating lie in front of our parents. She told them that I sold drugs at university. It was a completely false accusation. I had never touched drugs, let alone sold them, but Bella told it in such a convincing way that my parents believed her without questioning her. To this day, I still don't understand why she did it. We weren't particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. She was my sister, after all. I never thought she would be capable of doing something so twisted. It was a lie that could ruin my future, and at that moment, I truly believed she had succeeded. My father Benjamin reacted with a fury I had never seen before. He didn't give me a chance to explain anything. His anger hit me harder than I expected, and I felt him stop seeing me as his daughter. My mother Olivia remained silent, but her silence hurt just as much, if not more. She looked at me with such deep disappointment as if I had destroyed all her dreams for me. Meanwhile, Bella stood by, expressionless. She said nothing and did not acknowledge the chaos she had caused. She simply watched as my parents threw me out that same day. They kicked me out of the house without giving me a chance to explain or even process what was happening. I left with nothing and had to drop out of university because I couldn't afford it without their support. From one day to the next, I saw my future vanish. Over the next few months, I survived thanks to friends who let me sleep on their sofas while I did whatever work I could find. I felt completely lost. I had big dreams and suddenly everything I had worked for was gone. I tried to communicate with my parents, hoping they would see the truth. Each call ended in rejection. My father hung up before I could say anything. My mother just repeated hurtful words, refusing to listen or consider that they might be wrong. I kept hoping they would see through Bella's lies and remember who I really was. But they had already made up their minds. For them, I was guilty and there was no going back. Time passed, the years went by, and little by little I learned to rebuild my life from scratch. I saved every penny I earned as a waitress and eventually I was able to go back to school part-time. It was extremely difficult, but I was determined to prove to myself that I could forge my future even without their help. During this process, I met people who became my real family, friends who saw who I really was and supported me when my own family had abandoned me. They helped me recognize my worth, contributed to my healing and helped me regain my self-esteem. Eventually, I graduated, got a steady job and started building a life I was proud of. Then I met my perfect fiancé, Mark, 27. He is kind and understanding, everything I had been needing. When I told him about my family history, he didn't judge or feel sorry for me. Instead, he told me that family is not just about blood ties and that I have the right to choose who I want in my life. With him, for the first time, I felt truly loved and accepted. And I began to understand that I didn't need my parents' approval to feel complete. As our wedding approached, thoughts of my family came back. I hadn't seen them in 6 years and part of me wanted to contact them, to give them a chance to make things right. But every time I considered it, the painful memories came flooding back, the rejection, the shame, the way they dismissed me without a second thought. Why should they be part of one of the happiest days of my life when they weren't there for me during my most difficult times? Suddenly, I received a message from my father. Seeing his name on my phone after so many years took me completely by surprise. The message was short and to the point. He told me that my mother was very ill and wanted to see me because she missed me. There was no apology or mention of the past, no acknowledgement of the damage they had caused me. Just a vague reference to my mother's illness and their desire to reconnect. He also mentioned that he knew about my upcoming wedding and that both he and my mother wanted to attend. I found it strange and disturbing that they suddenly wanted to contact me. Where was this concern when I was struggling to survive after they abandoned me? They missed my graduation, my first job and practically everything important in my life. Now, just because my mother is ill, they act as if those 6 years never happened, as if I could easily forgive and forget. It seemed tremendously unfair to me. It may sound selfish, but this situation took me by surprise and made me feel very uncomfortable. They weren't there for the difficult times, but now they want to be part of the happy ones. I was overcome by a flood of emotions. Thinking about my sick mother made me feel guilty. After all, she's still my mother, and knowing that she's suffering is difficult to handle. I realized that their desire to see me wasn't just about the wedding. It could be about finding closure or making peace before it's too late, but forgiving them seems impossible. After all, they made me go through abandonment, disbelief, and all the difficulties I faced alone. How could I let them back into my life as if nothing had happened? After my father's message, I started receiving messages from relatives I didn't even know existed. They said it was wrong of me not to include my parents in my wedding, and that whatever had happened recently shouldn't matter compared to everything they had done for me throughout my life. This really upset me. I found it ironic that they showed up now that I didn't invite my parents to my wedding, but neither of them was willing to help me when I had practically nowhere to live. When I spoke to my fiancé about this, he immediately advised me to ignore the messages from my relatives because they have no relevance. He assured me that he will support whatever decision I make, but he also reminded me that our wedding day should focus on our happiness and enjoyment, not on past hurts. With regard to unresolved feelings, he asked me to consider what would make me happy in the long term, not just in the moment. I keep wondering if pushing them away now will only cause me more pain. Or would allowing them back make things worse? I feel very confused. I have worked very hard to create a life without them, finding my way, building my future, and a part of me wants to protect all that, to protect myself, and fears that letting them back in could ruin everything I have built. But another part feels guilty, especially considering my mother's health. I can't ignore that she's trying to contact me now, even though it feels like it's too late. Sometimes I think that including them in the wedding could be a way to finally move on and leave the past behind. But then I remember that they abandoned me based solely on Bella's words, without any proof or anything else. I don't know if I can just forget about these last 6 years. My wedding is in a few months and I'm really confused. Should I keep things as they are or should I let them back in? To be completely honest, I'm not sure if I want them back in my life. So I need some opinions. Am I the bad guy for refusing to let my parents back into my life after they believed my sister's lies and abandoned me? Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my initial post. I'm reassured to see that most people think my position is reasonable. However, I still feel caught up in a whirlwind of emotions. My father's message about my mother's illness and his desire to see me made me very nervous. I considered blocking their numbers, but I worried that I would regret it later if I didn't give them a chance. And then, without warning, Bella contacted me. She sent me a message saying that she had heard about my upcoming wedding. She mentioned Mom's illness and expressed her desire to fix things before it was too late. Everything seemed to change in an instant. Bella, the same person who had caused me so much pain, was now talking about family unity and healing. She told me how much she missed me and stressed the importance of bringing the family together. She mentioned that I had always been an important part of her life and that she wanted us to find peace. But all I could think about was her betrayal that had ruined everything. I was already unsettled by Dad's message, and Bella's only added to my confusion. What did she expect from me? Did she really think a few nice words would be enough to forgive her? She didn't even apologize or acknowledge the damage she had caused. Instead, she insisted on the importance of family, especially with Mom's health worsening. It all sounded fake, as if she was only reaching out for her own convenience. I couldn't help wondering if there were other motives behind her message. Something I wasn't seeing. She had been so cold and calculating when she lied about me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this had more to do with her image than anything else. The idea of seeing Bella again after so many years felt like reopening a wound that had barely healed. Although my mother's illness made me feel differently. I felt bad for wanting to shut the door on them when maybe they really wanted to make peace. But every time I thought about forgiving them, the memories of the past came back even stronger. I wondered if they would ever acknowledge the damage they had caused me. The idea of having them at my wedding seemed almost absurd, as if they could show up as proud parents after all this time. I kept thinking about my fiancé's advice to focus on my long-term happiness. My wedding should be a time of joy, not stress. But how can I find peace while carrying all this anger? Could I really move on if I never let them back into my life? I couldn't imagine Bella sitting in the front row as if nothing had happened. The idea of including them after everything they had done seemed wrong to me. I decided to reply briefly to Bella. I told her that I needed time to process everything and that I wasn't sure how I felt about her or my parents being at the wedding. I mentioned my uncertainty about my feelings towards them, considering everything that had happened. For some reason, I hoped he would understand. But his response was another message about the family, with no sign of regret or acknowledgement of his actions. He even had the nerve to say that he understood my feelings, but hoped I would see the bigger picture and let go of the past for Mom's sake. His response left me more confused than before. I thought taking time to reflect would help, but it only made things more complicated. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started contacting me, telling me to let go of my anger and warning me that I would regret it if I didn't reconnect with my family soon. They seemed to know only part of the story and assumed I was being irrational. Their comments hurt, but I realized that they didn't really know what had happened. This only increased my confusion and frustration. Days later, I received another message from my father with more information about my mother's health. He didn't give many details, but it was clear that she wasn't well. He mentioned that she had always loved me and wanted us to be a family again. It felt strange, as if he was trying to make me feel guilty instead of apologizing or acknowledging my pain. I wondered if he really understood the consequences of his actions. I spent many hours imagining what I would say to them if I saw them. I imagined telling them about the years of struggle, the nights of loneliness, and the betrayal that I still carried inside, but deep down I knew it wouldn't change anything. They would probably find a way to justify their behavior or minimize my feelings, saying that I was being dramatic. However, the thought of my sick mother weighed on me. Was it wrong to cling to my anger when she could be facing something serious? My fiancé has been incredibly supportive, reminding me that my feelings are valid and that I can set my own boundaries. He promised to back me no matter what my decision. I feel lucky to have someone who truly understands my pain and doesn't pressure me to forgive just for appearance's sake. He emphasizes that the decision is mine, but I can feel the weight of it all. As the wedding approaches and the pressure mounts, I am caught between wanting to allow my parents and Bella back into my life for some peace and protecting myself from more pain. My mother's illness complicates everything even more. I worry that I will regret it later if I don't let them in now. However, I also fear that opening the door to them could bring more anguish. Bella's message continues to echo in my mind, making me question whether I am being too harsh. But then I remember that she never showed remorse or acknowledged the pain she caused. How can I move forward when the past still feels so present? I wonder if forgiving them would really help me heal, or would it just reopen old wounds? My wedding should be a joyful occasion, but now it is clouded by these unresolved emotions. I'm at a point where I don't know if letting them back in would bring me peace or just more suffering. So here I am, still unsure and wondering, would allowing them back into my life be the right thing to do, or am I just setting myself up for another disappointment? Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last post, a few days after the previous update. I finally reached my limit and decided to visit my family. After weeks of putting it off, I couldn't ignore the fact that my mother was seriously ill. Part of me wanted to keep my distance, but I felt guilty and knew I would regret not seeing her one last time if her condition worsened. The hour-long drive to her house was especially difficult. I kept telling myself that I was doing it for my mother, not for my father or Bella, although that didn't make it any easier. I was even scared to see the house again. I had so many memories there. I had lived in that house all my life until 6 years ago, when I was forced to leave it, and now I felt almost compelled to return. When I arrived, everything felt strange. So much time had passed, but everything looked practically the same. To my surprise, only my mother was there, sitting by the window. I could hardly recognize her. My father was not there, which was a momentary relief, although I knew that meeting him was inevitable. Seeing her so weak and exhausted broke my heart. She looked so fragile that I just wanted to hug her and cry. I couldn't help thinking about all the time we had lost. We could have shared so many moments if Bella hadn't done what she did. I wouldn't have been so shocked to see Mum's condition if I could have been by her side all these years. Maybe I could have helped her in some way, but that opportunity was taken away from me by my older sister. Mom was happy and sad to see me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see the authoritarian figure I had always tried to impress. She was simply a mother, a person who had made mistakes. She apologized sincerely. She was direct in expressing her regret for not having communicated with me. She explained that she hadn't done so in all these years out of shame. When she realized that Bella had lied, she thought it was too late and that I would never forgive her. She told me that she had thought about contacting me many times, that she had written several letters that she never sent, and she apologized repeatedly. Hearing her express herself in this way caused me a mixture of sadness and relief. There was no mention of family obligations or expectations. She didn't pressure me to forgive her or forget what had happened. She simply took responsibility for her mistakes and apologized. It was overwhelming to process. Part of me wanted to scream and tell her how difficult everything had been, but I couldn't. I just hugged her and told her it was okay. I really forgave her. It was as if I had never been angry with her. All that was left was her regret, and I didn't want to add to it. I just wanted to be by her side. When my father came in, the atmosphere changed completely. He arrived as if he were in control of the situation, acting as if he had done nothing wrong. He did not apologize or acknowledge the pain they had caused me. Instead, he treated my feelings as insignificant, suggesting that I should get over it for the good of the family. He seemed to believe he was the victim because I had distanced myself for so long. He did not share my mother's perspective at all. I tried to remain calm, but anger was building up inside me. When I expressed how hurt I was by everything that had happened and how I had survived the last 6 years, she dismissed it by saying things like, "Oh, we thought we were doing what was best for the family." She refused to take any responsibility for her actions and continued to deflect the issue, as if I was to blame for not contacting them for years. I noticed that my mother looked uncomfortable, but she remained silent, perhaps exhausted by my father and our endless arguments. My father kept pushing, trying to make my decision to stay away seem unjustified. It was frustrating, and I felt that familiar feeling of helplessness from my childhood again, as if my voice didn't matter. I asked about Isabella and her absence, but they said she hadn't been able to come. It felt strange considering that she had communicated about family and forgiveness. However, when it came time to face the situation, she wasn't there. Deep down, I wasn't surprised. I imagined that she would avoid any real confrontation, even though she was the one who started it all. She had created this chaos and left others to deal with the consequences. After the visit, I felt exhausted instead of the peace I was looking for. I listened in silence as my father lectured me, believing that it might change my mind about forgiving them. However, I realized that I didn't need his approval or have to fit into a family that had let me go so easily. Before I left, my mother asked me to come back soon. She sounded desperate and looked sad. I wasn't sure if I would return, but I couldn't say goodbye for good. I hugged her and promised to keep in touch, asking her to contact me whenever she wanted or needed to. During the return trip, my mind was in turmoil. I felt divided. My mother's apology was genuine and meant more than I expected, but my father's attitude and Isabella's absence left me bitter, reliving the pain I had tried to forget. I wanted to forgive them and move on, but I didn't know how to do it without losing my sanity. I forgave my mother. I no longer hold a grudge against her, but with Dad and Bella, the situation is different. My wedding is in a month, and I'm not sure if I'll invite them or even if I'll keep them in my life. I will definitely keep in touch with my mother. I could invite her, but as I said, with Dad and Bella, I'm not sure. Maybe it's better to move on without them, keeping a healthy distance for my own peace of mind. It's difficult, especially knowing that my mother might not have much time. I feel a mixture of guilt, anger, and love, and I still don't know if I will ever find the peace I am looking for. Honestly, I'm not sure what my next step will be. I'll update if anything else happens. Update 3. Hi everyone, it's been a long time since my last update. 6 months have passed and a lot has happened. I would have updated before, but I needed time to process everything. Mark and I had a small and private wedding. After everything that happened with my family, we wanted a quiet day that focused on us. I decided to invite my mom and dad. My mom was very ill, and I knew I would regret it if she couldn't be there. It was easier to invite her because she had made a real effort to patch things up with me, and we were on good terms. She acknowledged her mistakes, and I could see that she really wished things had been different. I decided not to invite Bella. I didn't do it to hurt her. I just couldn't trust her not to cause trouble. After the wedding, Bella sent me a message, very upset that she hadn't been invited. I told her straight up that I didn't want her there, and then I blocked her number. That felt like a relief, like I had closed a painful chapter of my life. Unfortunately, almost 2 months after the wedding, my mother passed away. She didn't suffer. She left peacefully, with my father and me by her side. I am grateful for the time I was able to spend with her, even if it was little. In her last days, she was sweeter and more like the mother I remembered. Sometimes we would sit in silence together, and it felt comforting. I was able to say goodbye, and I will always be grateful for that. My mother's funeral was one of the most difficult days I have ever experienced. It was a simple ceremony with only family and close friends. We wanted to honor her life and celebrate who she was. Bella was also invited, but we thought she wouldn't come as she hadn't communicated after Mom's death. But on the day of the funeral, she suddenly appeared, demanding to know why she wasn't at the wedding, making everything revolve around her. Everything turned into chaos. Her screams overshadowed the beautiful words that were said about my mother. I felt embarrassed and hurt. Dad reached his limit. He was already suffering a lot from the loss of Mom. My parents had been dating since high school. They spent more than 40 years together, and it was clearly the worst thing that had happened to him. Bella's selfishness pushed him over the edge. He got up and demanded that she leave. He told her that she was disrespecting Mom's memory and that he never wanted to see her again. The room was filled with tension. Everyone was in shock, and I felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved that Dad had finally confronted her, but I was also worried about the consequences. Bella left in a rage, complaining about how unfair it all was, but I thought it was necessary to protect that day from her drama. It was like a breaking point for both my father and me. Although we weren't close, we both agreed that Mum deserved better than a chaotic funeral. Curiously, this experience brought my father and me a little closer. Our relationship is not perfect, and there is still some tension, but we have managed to maintain a civilized relationship. He has not apologized for his part in all this, but he now respects my boundaries and says he would like to have me in his life. We may not be close, but he is calm, and that is enough for now. Small steps, I guess. I feel strange in the position I am in now. I used to think I needed a big moment of forgiveness, but now I see that I just needed to let go. Losing my mother was very hard, but it brought me some peace. I can remember the good times with her and leave the rest behind. As for Bella, I have no plans to reconnect with her. I have learned that not everyone understands how their actions can affect others, and that's okay. I don't need her in my life anymore. I am now focusing on my life with Mark and building something positive with him. Finally, I want to thank everyone for their support during this difficult time. Your kind words and understanding have meant a lot to me. Sharing my story has been a relief, and knowing that there are people who care has made a big difference. I appreciate everyone who took the time to read my updates and share their thoughts. It really helps to know that I am not alone in this process. Thank you for being there for me.